So we're here with Brandon Weichert, my favorite geopolitical analyst. I thought of him yesterday or today, actually, when President Trump made some comments about the attempted assassination attempt on Putin. But what say you, Brandon? What's going on, my friend?
Well, thanks for having me as always. My view on this is a little bit different than what most mainstream people are talking about. You saw yesterday, Trump came out full of, Sturm und Drang, and he was, very irate at Putin. How can he do this? What is he thinking? He didn't seem to realize, and it's pretty amazing that he didn't know, considering he's the leader of the free world. He didn't realize that somebody, wink, tried to assassinate Vladimir Putin over the weekend. And then today, of course, he since came back out and sort of measured and walked back his comments. He admitted that he was just briefed shortly before that afternoon today, a statement that he gave walking back his sort of initial outrage at Vladimir Putin for launching this missile fusillade at the Ukrainians in the middle of these very tense negotiations between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine for a possible peaceful end to the Ukraine war. What I think happened here was I don't believe it was the Ukrainians at all, or maybe it was the Ukrainians, but they were acting as sort of like a zombie force for the true masters of this operation to assassinate Vladimir Putin, and that is our own U.S. intelligence agencies. I suspect the big one is probably CIA. And I believe that there was I don't believe Donald Trump is in control of the intelligence community. I don't believe he's in control.
Obviously not.
Yeah. I think that the fact that it's bad either way, because either yesterday's statement, he wasn't briefed on the fact that somebody tried to assassinate Putin from the West, or maybe he was aware, but yet he was playing along, irate and upset, possibly because he might have been thinking in the back of his mind, well, if they just did this without my orders, trying to kill Putin in the middle of this negotiation, perhaps they're now going to do it to me, and I better play along for the third time. And we know the second shooter, right? The second shooter, we definitely know, had very strange connections to the Ukrainian movement. Furthermore, I would argue, I think his last name, I can't remember the last name. There's Crooks, and then there's the other one. And the second shooter, the second shooter who was arrested outside, in southern Doral, the golf club, he was the one with Ukrainian ties. He is a frequent visitor at Fort Bragg. I'm very familiar with Fort Bragg. In fact, Fort Bragg is where one of the Special Forces operations groups, the U.S. Special Forces operation groups, has been deploying out of into Ukraine. This is, something that they dare not speak about it on the corporate media. But I know for a fact that the U.S. Special Forces have been deploying into Ukraine in supposedly auxiliary roles or training roles. But you and I both know that those guys are probably deploying a little bit beyond the rear. This explains why last fall there was an attempted assassination of one of those colonels of the Special Forces group out at Fort Bragg. If you remember, that's been buried.
The two Chechens, right?
The two Chechens, correct. Yes. Yeah. I believe that was a hit put out by the Russian intelligence services as a message to the then Biden regime: knock it off with what you're doing in Ukraine against our Russian forces. And so either way, with the assassination of Putin, that's the trigger point here, the attempted assassination. That's why Putin is sort of backtracking on his, I think, very real desire to get a peaceful solution and to get a new deal with the American president, Donald Trump. He didn't just wake up and do this because he's crazy. He woke up because somebody tried to kill him. And if you look at the style of the attack, there's only one group in the world right now that knows at all times where Putin is going and where he's moving from. And that is not the Ukrainian intelligence services. That is specifically the U.S. intelligence services. This was admitted to, by the way, back in, I want to say either late 22 or early 23. It was admitted to by elements in the U.S. intelligence services that we were helping the Ukrainians to target Russian assets in the Ukraine war, notably when we were actually starting to let the Ukrainians fire cruise missiles into Russia proper. CIA targeting analysts were helping them to sort of range those targets and make them more accurate. And also, multiple people have said in open source, one of them being a regular consultant for the DoD, a guy named Peter Zion, who's a very famous geopolitical guy, but he has repeatedly for the last 2 years, beginning on Joe Rogan's show, talked about how his sources in CIA and DoD have told him explicitly that they have the capability, that they know exactly where Putin is, they know when he's on the move, and they know where he's going. Now, that might be a little bit of braggadocio on our part, to our intelligence services part, to try to put the fear of God into Putin. But if you look at our capabilities and our surveillance capacity, what we have in space, I think we know where he's going most of the time. And I think there's a rogue element that thought, hey, the president is, we're not going to tell him, we're just going to do it, and we're going to ask for forgiveness later. This sort of thing would have never been tried under any other president, by the way.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense in that he just fired 100 national security people.
Yes, they're connected. Those two things are connected. Absolutely, no doubt, in my mind.
Yeah. And what a way to keep the war going, right? Is to kill Putin, and then the war can't stop.
Well, furthermore, I think they might not know, because they're very stupid in our intelligence services. It's lack of intelligence in many cases. But they might not know, but I think they probably do on this one. The successors to Vladimir Putin are way worse than Putin. In fact, there's one guy who would likely take over, at least in a temporary role, a guy named Patrushev, who is the head of their intelligence network. He was sort of he came up in the KGB with Putin. That's how he has the role he has. He's one of Putin's only trusted right-hand men. When Yevgeny Primakov did his aborted coup, it was Patrushev who took over the defense of Moscow, and basically with Shoigu was basically de-escalating that while Putin fled and went to safer pastures. So if Putin were to be killed or to be removed, someone far worse, because Patrushev is way worse than Putin. And of course, beyond Patrushev, we know there is a very strong and well-organized national imperialist group represented by the likes of the thinker Alexander Dugin, which is, viscerally opposed to stable, nice relations with the West, and is using Ukraine as an excuse to basically goad on the war as a means of rejuvenating the Russian state. And
they would like nothing more that element to continue to push into Ukraine and to take Ukraine essentially. And that's why you had Medvedev come out today and say, well, the new buffer zone is everything but Lviv.
Yes. Well, which is, look, and this is becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy, because of course, at the start of the war, everyone was saying, and the first 3 weeks of the war, I admit, I assumed this was the game plan by Russia, but then I realized, wait a second, the Russians are really holding back. The Russians really could have gone in and crushed everything with the capabilities they had on hand, and they didn't. And part of that, was maybe the plucky Ukrainians, but a lot of that was because the Russians were really trying not to destroy everything in sight. They were trying to remove what they believed was an enemy regime in Kyiv, and that was what the whole mission was, and then it kind of ballooned out from there. But it was not the intention. I do not believe anymore. I've stopped believing this after the first 3 weeks of the war. I don't believe that the Russians have set out to reclaim all of Ukraine and to push into Poland. I think the original objective was Putin wanted to secure the eastern portion of Ukraine. He wanted to reaffirm his control over Crimea and then make a post-Zelensky government in Kyiv that was truly neutral and basically neutered. And it has ballooned out from there, not because of Putin. Putin is responding. It's because of what the NATO and West and the Americans have been doing for the last 4 years, escalating when they should have been de-escalating. And I think this assassination attempt on Putin, this is a much bigger deal than they're giving any airtime to.
Yeah, that's very quiet.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's because that's the tell. This was a deep state operation. This was not Ukraine. Maybe the Ukrainians were doing it on our behalf, but we did all the legwork, I can guarantee you. And it was our surveillance assets that were being used. So here we have yet again, a moment where, and what is Putin going to do? He's obviously not going to be like, okay, I'll just take one on the chin. He's not going to do that. He's gonna respond, and he has.
Well, he has to respond. Or
he does. Well, because they'd kill him, right? The people, the nastier people that I'm talking about, like Patrushev and these others, younger ones that are coming up the ranks in Russia's elite, they're even worse than Putin, and they absolutely would use that as an excuse to remove him.
Talking about escalation, which is happening, you had Merz in Germany saying he's going to give the Taurus long-range, I think 2,500 kilometers missile to the Ukrainians to build in country. Germany won't give it to him, but he's going to give them the capability.
Yeah, it's been very interesting the last 72 hours, because initially it was they're just going to give it to them and let them do whatever they want. Then it was, well, we're going to let you build it, but we're going to put strings attached. This morning I was reading there, it was on Twitter, so take from this what you will. But this morning, one of those defense Twitter accounts said that the German government is still going to hand over the Taurus missiles or let the Ukrainians build them, but as long as there are strings attached wherein the Ukrainians cannot attack Russia proper without explicit orders from Berlin, which that to me indicates the Berlin government is very aware of how bad the situation is getting, and they're very aware that they will be among the frontline countries if this thing goes south, which it looks like the deep state is really trying to push us into.
But do they care? That's the question.
Well,
I want the war.
Do they want the war? I think that the German government, has been dragged kicking and screaming this entire war. That's my read. Remember, there was a term, the previous chancellor, Olaf Scholz, the German press, which very much wanted the war, the German press came up with a term called Scholzing, and it was meant to describe this idea that Scholz would say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then behind the scenes he was quietly neutering what he had just said. So I believe there's a great ambivalence and fear on the part of the German elite. Would they like to see NATO at war? Sure. Do they want to be on the front lines? No. And I think on some level they're very much afraid that Putin will make a point, if it gets to World War III levels, he will make a point of smashing Germany, in retribution for what has gone on in Ukraine. And they're trying to signal to the Russians, hey, we're not really the leaders on this. It's Keir Starmer in England, Emmanuel Macron, and
the UK. And
the UK is the big one here.
Yeah. We recommend you take this moment to do what we're about to do, which is enjoy an Alp.
Your government doesn't care about you. That's why you need a medical emergency kit. It contains life-saving medications like ivermectin, Z-Pak, and antibiotics. Stock them before they block them.
Yeah, the Admiralty, as my source calls it, is running this war.
Well, they still think it's the Crimean War in the 1800s, and they don't seem to understand that this is a totally different animal, and certainly UK, but the West in general. If the Western alliance has to fight a world war against a near-peer competitor like Russia and or China, or even in Iran, as we've spoken about previously, the Western powers will lose. Yeah. We will lose a great power. I can't stress this enough. I say this to people and they get very uncomfortable. This is why I'm the most hated defense analyst in the public right now. We are going to lose a world war if it's triggered soon. We will lose. There's no winning this thing.
It's based on our leadership. I mean, you can make that call.
Right. Well, obviously, if the fact that
not
if
Trump, but the lead,
right. Well, this is the point. Yeah. Let's use this assassination attempt as an example. The fact that a rival foreign leader was targeted for a kill, probably by our own intelligence agencies, and they didn't see fit to even brief not only the president, but where was Ratcliffe, the CIA director? Where's Tulsi Gabbard? What they have done, the bureaucracy has done what they did in the first term to Trump. They have hermetically sealed the entire Trump political appointees, including Trump himself. They've hermetically sealed them, and they've basically prevented any actionable intelligence from reaching them in a meaningful way. They brief him after the fact, 24 hours after the fact, after he went out and made these very, very
I
damaging
almost
statements.
thought, if you go down the conspiracy rabbit hole, I was thinking maybe Trump knew what they were doing, and he said Putin's crazy in order to kind of set up an 8D chess move where he would get the American public to see what was actually going, and then come out the day later and say, "Wait, I didn't know they targeted, Putin."
Yeah, that could be, but the point is that an element of our intelligence services is so powerful that they have chosen not even to give a warning to the elected president, not even to kind of pretend like the Constitution matters. That's how far gone we are.
Yeah.
And it's very scary
Since
because
they killed Kennedy, 80 years
look,
ago.
they almost killed. Listen. They almost killed Reagan. They got rid of Nixon. They almost killed Trump, not once but twice within 4 months of those attempts.
Mm-hmm.
I still think that Trump is not safe. And I think Trump probably on some level is aware that he's not safe. I mean, there's a reason when he was in Riyadh, he wouldn't drink the coffee they gave him. Okay. That was almost a Putin-like, move. Now he did eventually drink it after a while, but initially he looked at it and he eyed it, and he waited for the crown prince to drink it, because I think on some level Trump knows that his life is not in his own hands right now. In many respects, I said this to a former CIA, very high up CIA guy on another podcast this morning, and he was the one who suggested it, and I agreed. I said, look, it looks like Trump might be kind of a hostage right now. He's a hostage to the deep state. That's very scary because the intelligence community has a lot of money and a lot of power, and obviously they're taking pot shots at world leaders in the hopes that it triggers something that Trump can't negotiate out of. That is the tell. That's the key.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
But I would say if they killed Trump at this point, I think the country would fall apart. I mean, because people would not accept that, but they wouldn't go into a big civil war, but they would retreat into certain.
I think that's what they want.
Yeah.
I think they want ambivalence. Remember in the 90s and the 2000s, right? Everybody was like sort of checked out from politics except like the big nerds and the people who have interests. Before Trump, then kind of Obama, it started to change with his first campaign, but then really with Trump, everybody's now political. I mean, you get rich now by becoming a political influencer on social media, not by talking about celebrity. You're talking about politics now, whether you're for or against Trump. I think our bureaucracy wants that to stop. They don't like everybody engaged because guess what? Trump is a political flashlight. He's shining a light on all of the corruption and all of the misdeeds, and they don't like it because they're now in the crosshairs.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Is there anything else you wanted to get out that you see happening right now?
I'm very concerned about the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I don't understand what Netanyahu's doing. He is complete. I don't believe this is an act by Trump and Netanyahu. There's a theory that this was 5D chess and that Netanyahu and Trump gamed this out. I don't believe that's the case. I think that Netanyahu has become a very dangerous, unstable player on the world stage. The sooner Israel can remove him from power would probably be the best thing for everybody. The Israelis have entered into a quagmire in Gaza. I don't know if you saw. It's a disaster. It's a disaster. Look, they would have been better off. And I'm saying this in a flippant way, but they would have been better off just nuking Gaza at the opening of this thing 8 months ago or a year ago, and then just taking the bad press at that point and moving on. But instead, the way that they've done this, they've not only committed all of these resources, but they've also
they
everything.
The biggest mobilization
That's
ever.
right. And it's not enough. And they've not only done that, but then they've also alienated all of the Arab powers. The Arab powers can't do business with them. They can't, because the people in the Arab countries hate the Israelis now because of what's happened in Palestine. And so the Arab leaders who were trying to come together with Israel under the Abraham Accords, that's over. They're now talking about the Abraham Accords without Israel, which sort of defeats the point. But this is all Netanyahu's fault. And, the Iranians triggered this thing in October 7th. They helped the Hamas and Hezbollah and all these. I got it. But the point is that Netanyahu needed to be far more strategic, and he needed to be aware of the limits of his own country's power and capabilities. He's not. And I think that's partly because he assumed that he could get Trump to come along no matter what. It's a complete misread of Trump. And Netanyahu's and his country are going to pay for that, because Israel is now isolated, alone, and they're at the weakest they've ever been. And they're not fighting Arab armies of sand like they did in the last century. They're fighting hardened guerrillas who are enmeshed. And every time you kill one of them, you create 10 or 13 more. And this is the problem. And this is why, I don't know if you watch Piers Morgan, I occasionally do, but I noticed something very interesting. He's had a series of Israeli leaders, ambassadors and whatnot, and spokespeople on. They're all using different facts and figures every week that don't even make any sense anymore. One of them said that before 10/7, there was about 20 to 30,000 Hamas fighters, and then they were able to cut down that number by about 2 to 3,000. So about 16 to 18,000 Hamas fighters remained. The Israelis pulled back. Now they're going back in. The assessment was the Hamas restored their fighting numbers to about 20 or 30,000. Now the other day, you have the Israeli ambassador in the UK telling Piers Morgan there are over 40,000 Hamas fighters. And then another ambassador was saying, another official saying, well, we've killed 30,000 Hamas fighters. Those numbers don't add up. They don't make sense. And I actually don't think the IDF knows what they're killing. I don't think they know anymore who they're killing, what they're destroying. They're just pancaking the place.
No, they're just destroying. That's the point.
Yes. And that is the point. And then we go into a very dark spot. Is this the plan? Are they ethnically cleansing?
Well, I think Netanyahu is one of, and I've just come to this realization recently, but there was Zelensky, Obama, Macron, all these leaders who are not working for their own people. I think Netanyahu may be one of those. I think there's probably a bigger agenda here. And he's just carrying it out. And I think that October 7th was not entirely, unknown that it was going to happen. I think it's very 9/11-ish. And I think that was, somebody knew that was going down.
Well, I also think, though, under Netanyahu, the IDF got very complacent and very arrogant. Yeah. And I think that they believed that no matter what, Hamas was never going to be able to do anything. Remember, they were paying off Hamas not to attack them. That was part of the mowing the grass strategy. They were actually under the table. Netanyahu's government, to keep them quiet, was giving them money, not realizing or caring that Hamas was taking that money and buying missiles and weapons and stockpiles of ammunition to do the 10/7 attacks. And I think on some level, they didn't care. And I certainly think that if a proper after-action report is done of 10/7, and it has yet to really be done, you will find many failures coming from Netanyahu's office. Also, there is a chance that the Israeli intelligence services didn't tell Netanyahu everything.
Well, that's somebody knew. Maybe it wasn't him. I was told
but he's going to get the blame, and he should for what's happened since, because certainly there have been a lot of strategic errors.
I was told he didn't know, and he wanted, this is ruining his legacy. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, we do know. So what would lend credence to that? And I don't know, because I used to think for sure, but now I don't know, because Netanyahu's clearly the only reason he's doing what he's doing, opening a forefront war. The only reason he's doing this is because he's trying to save his political skin and try to stay in power as long as possible.
Yeah,
and so there is, though, something to be said. If people remember pre-10/7, the same kind of deep state elements in the Israeli government were going after Netanyahu, using the same kind of tactics and attacks, lawfare, that the deep state here in the U.S. went after Donald Trump. And so it's possible that part of the destruction of Netanyahu was the Israeli deep state, saying we're not going to share actionable intelligence. We're going to downplay it to try to get him to look bad. Well, if that's the case, mission success, because, Rare Rabbit can't get out of the hole that Netanyahu has done.
I don't know how this is going to end, and it's not good. But, I don't.
World War III.
I see all these leaders who are not working for their own governments, and they just are clinging with their fingernails to power,
Right.
no matter what. You look at Zelensky, you look at Macron, you look at all of them. Netanyahu, that feels very much like that. And that they didn't care about the Israeli people. They vaxxed them like 8 times.
I know. Well,
That was a
he's
clinical
proud
trial.
of it. He's
Yeah.
proud of it. He has the first shot he received. He has a plaque of it in his office. Netanyahu does. He's very
Or
proud
maybe
of
was
it.
saline, who knows? But
I just want to say one more thing real quick before
Yeah.
we go. The other hot spot to watch out for are these Chinese military exercises around Kinmen and Matsu Islands. What the Chinese Navy's doing. It is my contention that China is going to go in. I think they might go in this fall. And there's nothing we can do to stop them. They know that we've got 500 ground troops in Taiwan. That was revealed in the last 48 hours in the South China Morning Post, I believe. Obviously that is a major scandal, because I can tell you those units that we have deployed there are special forces units, and what they are doing is they're preparing the battlefield. They are helping the Taiwanese who want to fight to set up a civil defense capability when the Chinese come in. The problem is those 500 guys are going to be stuck there. We're not pulling them out, and that's a tripwire. And because I think the deep state also realizes if China takes Taiwan or tries to, I don't really think the United States under Trump is going to try to stop them. We can't, for one. We don't have the capacity anymore. But second of all, I think Trump is not going to want to have to get into a fight with the Chinese.
Well, he said, "Why are we defending Taiwan?"
Right. And so I would be watching very closely over the next 8 months what is going on. And this exercise is very significant, because what they're probably going to do when they decide to go in Beijing, they're going to go in using a blockade. They're going to have to take Kinmen, Matsu, and Penghu Islands first, which are the outlying islands around Taiwan. And then they will blockade the island, and then they will slowly squeeze it. And after 6 to 8 months of a major blockade, the idea is the Taiwanese will be starving and begging for help. Nobody will come to their aid. And at that point, they will either surrender or be too weak to stop the actual invasion. That's, I think, what the thinking in Beijing is. I think they are going to use these sort of asymmetrical units or asymmetrical capabilities to sort of grind down Western willingness to fight. So it's going to get very bleak very fast, I think, in the Indo-Pacific in the next 6 to 8 months.
It's going to be a tough year. Anyway, Brandon, thank you.
Thank you.
Love having you on. Love the insights. Take care, my friend.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.